Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm your host, Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News, and it's our weekly roundup of stories making headlines across northern Michigan with the people that are covering those stories. And this week I'm joined by John Fletcher from the Associated Press. John, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you back, and it's nice to kind of get a half hour with you one-on-one. Last time you were here, I felt like we had so much more we could talk about, and with extra people, we kind of spread the minutes out. So it's good to have you back. Let's talk a little bit about Associated Press, and we'll kind of revisit that issue. We talked about it the first time you were here, but just to give people a little bit of a background of what AP does, what you do here in northern Michigan.
Certainly, glad to. The Associated Press is a news organization that many people don't know much about, although it happens to be the oldest and the largest news gathering agency in the world. It goes back to the mid-1800s. And short history was it was established by a small group of newspapers in New York City that were fiercely competitive, but also realized at that particular time that they needed to be able to pool their resources so that they could go after some of the major stories that were just prohibitively expensive for them to cover on their own. Things like the Mexican War and the Great Migration of people out west, and some of the old news from Europe that a lot of the recent immigrants were still interested in. So they put together the resources using this high-tech device called the telegraph, which was very high-tech back then. Yeah. And they basically established this middleman, the Associated Press, to gather news that they could all use. And because of that, and because each of these papers had their own philosophical, ideological disposition, the Associated Press news had to be very objective and fair and straight down the line so that all of them would feel comfortable using it. And so we helped to establish this whole concept of objectivity in the news, and just not taking any particular political point of view, but just telling it as straight as we could, and the whole system grew out from there. Today, we have more than 300 bureaus all over the world, and we are producing news 24/7. 365 every day. We can cover everything from the wars taking place in Afghanistan and the news in the Middle East to what happens in Washington, all of the political and governmental news, but also things happening in individual states. We have a bureau, several bureaus here in the state of Michigan, the biggest one in Detroit, of course, and we have people in Lansing and myself here in Traverse City. And my job is, I wear several hats, but I am primarily interested in covering the Great Lakes and environmental issues regarding the lakes and other environmental issues in the upper Midwest. As you know, the Great Lakes produce all kinds of interesting news on invasive species and toxic pollution and the fishing that's so important to the economy of this region. And aside from that, I also keep an eye on general, what we call general assignment news that happens up in northern Michigan in the UP that would be of interest more widely. And that could be anything from the cherry industry to some high-profile crime. You name it. There's a lot to write about, a lot of stories to tell up here. I'm also presently involved in covering some of the state political campaigns and issues that we're looking at this fall. So I've been out in Traverse City now for 20 years, and I've really enjoyed my time here, and just find that there's something new every day to look at and to make it interesting.
Well, I know that, and I want to talk more about the upcoming election in just a minute. Maybe because AP is the oldest news organization, it goes without saying, but it kind of set the mold for this concept of bureau reporters or network news, or NBC has a New York and a Chicago and a Los Angeles bureau. The whole layout of how we view news today, really the groundwork for that was laid by AP more than 100 years ago.
Certainly to a great extent. And we are organized as a nonprofit co-op, which surprises some people. We're not actually a for-profit business, but what that means is that we are owned by the newspapers around the country that take the AP and use their news in our papers, and also the broadcasters, radio and TV stations that take our report. They have boards of directors who oversee what we do and Of course, we have top editors who actually run our day-to-day operations, but we do answer to who we call our members. Because once a radio station or a newspaper takes the AP news service, they become our members, and our job is to serve their needs.
What's really interesting, and I mentioned it before we sat down here, but where people may not realize at home is that a lot of what you see in the newspaper, a lot of what you hear on the radio or on the television newscasts is a function of Associated Press. It's an AP story or an AP wire story that either in some cases may get cut and paste into a paper or a broadcast script, or it's the basis for what we write maybe as broadcast journalists. We rewrite this, that, or the other, or an AP story gives us the impetus to call and do some further digging.
It does, and another part of that is that because of the unique arrangement that we have with our members, we are able to take content, news that is produced by a station or a newspaper, and maybe do some work on that and put it on the wire as an
Sure.
AP story. The copyright laws allow us to do that. And so that really gets back to the concept of what we call ourselves as a news cooperative, a co-op. We have this cooperative arrangement. So often when some major news event will break in a faraway place, the first word that we will get will be from the local newspaper or radio station or TV station. They will share what they have with us. We'll also work on producing the story ourselves using our resources. We work together, and that way put together stories that benefit everyone. And that's the concept. That's how you try to cover the whole world with a limited staff. So it works very well, we think.
And yeah, like you said, and it works both ways. When I look at the wire, and at WTCM we use a different wire service now, but it works the same way as Associated Press, in that at the bottom of those wire copies you will see if it came from John Smith at WXLL
Right.
station or whoever contributed that story. If it's not someone on AP, it does flow back and forth both ways.
Certainly does.
The one interesting story, I guess, just to share with you, I had, my first job in Indiana, we had an AP station. We were used to contributing back and forth. It was almost a given that, anytime you had a big story or the lead story of the day, you needed to send it off to AP, and it would end up on the wire that day.
Right.
Moved to Montana, started doing the same thing there, and after a month on the job, I got a check in the mail from AP, and I think it was for $6 or something like that. And I think they had paid me $2 or $3 for every contribution, which was unheard of. It made me want to write a story to them every day. I think they have probably different rules or different policies by state.
Yeah, they have fluctuated over the years, and it sort of depends on where you are. But
Right.
But certainly,
The middle of the Montana country would probably more in demand for help there.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, but contributions are most welcome, and I think that the papers and the broadcasters do understand that it is very much a give and take relationship, and sometimes when you break a story, get a scoop, it can be counterintuitive to share it with other people, but
Right.
Most of the time people are willing to do that because they know that the time will come when it will come back to help us.
That was going to be my next question for you, is do you get satisfaction or frustration or both out of seeing your story, hearing your story on the local news, knowing that that's your work and it's coming across as a TV story or something like that?
For the most part, satisfaction, I must say, because when you work with the AP, you come to understand that your copy, your stories are going to be used in a lot of ways. Yeah. There are some newspapers that very generously will leave your byline on the story so everyone knows who wrote it. Others will take it off and just use the AP little bug in the lead paragraph, which is nice too. Of course, ideally, you'd like to see your name out there as much as you can, and you'd like to see your company credited. But it's so big and it's used in so many different ways that we feel pretty good about the credit that we receive. Of course, we, like everyone else, we're in a very competitive news market, and especially now, there are just so many alternative sources of news that weren't around a few decades ago. So it's very important for us to get our brand out there, to let people know just what AP is and how important we are to to the day-to-day news that people get, especially from far-off places, but also right here locally, where we have a very, very important role to play.
Well, I know that a lot of the stories we will be seeing in the coming weeks and leading up to Election Day from you and from Associated Press will have a lot to do with the upcoming election.
Correct.
Tell us what you're going to be focusing on in Lansing, and from our previous conversation just before we started, it sounds like you and I will be covering a lot of the same things here in the next few weeks.
I think so. I have been assigned for the next few months anyway to assist my colleagues in Detroit and Lansing on state politics and government. That often happens when you get into the heat of a campaign.
Yep.
We need all hands on deck for that, and my background is actually in politics and government. I started out with the AP in Raleigh, North Carolina, where the area I was raised, and I, for most of that time, was our chief state house correspondent down there. I did coverage of the governor, the legislature, statewide campaigns, that type of thing. So I'm familiar with that terrain, and then I also spent some time in our Washington, D.C. bureau doing government and politics. And so what I'm going to be doing this fall is keeping an eye on some of the races, particularly the Senate race between Pete Hoekstra and Debbie Stabenow. And I will also be looking at perhaps some of the House races, some of the ballot initiatives that will be up for consideration. There are quite a few of those this time around, some very high-profile issues on the ballot. Certainly enough to keep us busy, but some huge questions on the ballot. Of course, the presidential race. Michigan's always a key player there, so enough for people to be focusing on.
Well, let's start with the Senate race. Again, Pete Hoekstra is winning the Republican primary, losing his bid for the governor's nomination last time around to Rick Snyder, of course. And what do you make of that race? And does Pete Hoekstra have a chance? The forever argument is, does any Republican have a chance in a Senate race in Michigan?
Well, certainly, historically, there have been many Republicans who have won. The Democrats have been more successful as of late. Spencer Abraham was, of course, the person who Debbie Stabenow defeated to become the senator. So much from year to year will depend on the general mood of the electorate and which party seems to sort of have the upper hand. 2 years ago, it was a great time to be a Republican and to run with the Tea Party movement was sort of at its height, and there was a lot of outrage over the debt and a lot of concern about that. There was some backlash about the president's health care law that had just been passed into law. Yep. And so it was certainly a good time to be a Republican. This time around, at least as we speak today, President Obama seems to be doing a bit better. Of course, that's very fluid, and anything can happen between now and the election, but right now in Michigan, polls show him up. He seems to be doing a bit better in Ohio, which is a key state. And I think that, if what the polls are indicating, Senator Stabenow seems to be reaping some benefit from that and to be in the lead right now. I had an interview just this week with Mr. Hoekstra. He was up in our area, up in Elk Rapids, touring a factory up there, and we sat down for an interview, and he acknowledged that he is running behind right now, but said that they're getting ready to go on with their television ads, which, whether we like it or not, are a big part of the campaign in modern times, and can do a lot to sway people one way or another. So he still feels confident that he can make his case and can make a very strong run.
It seems to me that this could very well be a case of whichever way the state goes on the presidential ticket may well decide this Senate race as well, and whether that's because people will check, straight Republican, straight Democrat, or how they will do it. But as you said, the mood just seems kind of to be flowing back and forth.
It does indeed. A lot of that is just the economic uncertainty that we face right now as a country. People do look to the government for help when economic issues become very important, when the economy goes bad. There's certainly a big debate in our society about the role that government should play. Should it be big? Should it be small? But either way, anytime the economy is in trouble, it ends up bouncing squarely into the political arena. And this year, with everything that's happened in recent years, people are still very anxious and worried about the job situation and which way the economy is going to go, the huge federal deficit that we have. And so that's squarely at the top of the agenda for the voters and for the candidates. And they're both going to be making their case about which approach they think will work. And that being the case, you naturally are going to talk a lot about the positions taken by the people at the top of your ticket.
Right.
When you talk to Hoekstra, he talks about what Romney and Ryan would do. And obviously, Senator Stabenow is going to be talking about some of the things that President Obama has done. So yes, there's obviously that draw there.
Let me I'll ask you one more question about this race, and then we'll jump ship to another category. But
Okay.
What's your take on endorsements these days? And it seems to me like there are so many of them that they almost become irrelevant. But one that surprised me within the past couple of weeks was the Farm Bureau endorsing Debbie Stabenow. And I know she was up in Leelanau County a few weeks ago talking about the Farm Bill and the effort to get it pushed and to get it passed, rather. And her take on it was Republicans have it's their move. They need to make the next move. And then if you dig a little deeper, you hear Republicans say, well, we're hung up on this issue of food stamps, and the Democrats want to put more money on food stamps into a farm bill, which we don't agree with.
Right.
So the farm bill endorsement kind of surprised me. I don't know if you want to touch on that specifically or just generally endorsements.
Well, yeah, they can certainly help. During any campaign, there are so many interest groups that will give their endorsements. They never hurt, to
Right.
get them.
Yep.
They probably are not going to make a huge difference one way or another in a race, although sometimes they could. What is significant about the Farm Bureau endorsement for Senator Stabenow is that generally the Michigan Farm Bureau will endorse Republicans.
Right.
And they don't do it exclusively, but mostly they do side with Republicans. And in a high-profile race like this one, that was certainly a coup for the senator to get that. An obvious reason behind it is that she chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee, and is certainly a very important voice on farm policy on a federal level, especially now that they're working on renewing the Farm Bill, which happens every 5 years. However, I think it also indicates that Senator Stabenow has made a very strong effort to reach out to the farm community and to advocate, especially in Michigan, for issues of concern to them. From the people I've spoken with the Bureau and others, that's what they say, and so they have taken that step. And regardless of what all was behind it, the fact that a traditionally Republican-leaning organization has sided with her is certainly something that she can trumpet, and I'm sure that she will. And it's an indication of being able to reach out beyond your traditional base into another area to pull over some people who might not historically have voted for you. Now, Mr. Hoekstra tells me that he's heard from a lot of grassroots farmers who were not pleased with the endorsement and will not be supporting her. And of course, you can't expect to get unanimous support,
Right. Yep.
but it certainly helps.
Let's talk about another big race that seems to be drawing attention and interest nationally, the 1st Congressional District. Congressman Dan Benešek running against Gary McDowell for the second time. I covered
Correct.
that race a couple of years ago when obviously Dr. Benešek won the race. Why is it getting so much attention now? And obviously the other interesting factor in that is that the congressional district has changed pretty drastically. We've now got Traverse City as part of that district, whereas
Correct.
Before we were represented by Dave Camp. So it's a whole new territory.
It is. The redistricting, bringing in our area here in Traverse City, would certainly, you would think it would favor the incumbent. I know that was the intent of the Republican-controlled legislature to make the area a bit more Republican for his benefit. And it's going to be a fascinating race. It is one of the most closely watched House races in the country because it is seen as one of just a few that can really be seen as a toss-up. Now, most of the analyses I have read and most of the prognostications by the Washington insiders who follow these things is that you would have to give Benešek a slight edge just by virtue of incumbency, by virtue of the way the district has been reconfigured.
Yep.
You would have to think he would have a slight edge, but it is seen as very competitive, and some regard it as a toss-up. So it's going to be fun to watch. What I find interesting about it is that Mr. McDowell, the Democratic nominee, is in many ways a lot like Bart Stupak, the previous congressman from the UP, low-key guy who has a great deal of interest in local issues and believes in being a part of this, sort of the tradition that they've had in northern Michigan of having a member of Congress who is locally focused and very interested in trying to use the levers of the federal government to obtain funding for local projects, that type of thing. And Congressman Benešek, when he ran, it was during the Tea Party year, and he had a lot of support from Tea Party groups. He took very strong sort of ideological positions on issues of government funding and government spending and the need to bring the deficit under control. And so now he's still, as he's campaigning, is still campaigning very strongly on the idea of reining in the government. And so it's going to be interesting to see how those two sides play and what kind of congressman this district wants.
What I find interesting, and I kind of defeat my own argument here, but it seems like, and again, for those who don't know, Gary McDowell, a former state representative, he had a lot more airtime, a lot more presence in the market, the Traverse City area market, just by virtue of his presence as a state lawmaker. 2 years ago, I thought it might even be closer 2 years ago. Congressman Benešek has been criticized for not really being around the district much, especially the redistricted area. It took him a while to get down to Traverse City. He obviously covers a big geographic area now, where Mr. McDowell maybe already has some of that recognition. But again, obviously that didn't matter 2 years ago. The other thing that I find maybe interesting in terms of who's running is who is not running. Derek Bailey had gone up against, or had considered going up against Gary McDowell for the Democratic primary. There was talk of a Grand Traverse County Commissioner, Larry Inman, if I'm not mistaken, going up against Dan Benešek in the primary for that exact reason, that Congressman Benešek wasn't around the district enough. What do you make of how that shakes out? Does that play a role, and is that on people's minds, or is that just for political junkies like you and me who care more than the average person?
It's going to be a good question. It's one of the things that I explored in a piece that we're releasing this week about that race. Certainly, I think that earlier on there were those who thought that the Congressman Benešek, just getting into office, was not getting around the district as much as they would have liked. I did interview Larry Inman for that story, and he told me that that was a complaint of his earlier on, which is why he considered, at least momentarily, running against him. However, they did sit down and talk, and he decided that the congressman did have an interest in getting out and meeting people, and since then they've worked very closely together. And Mr. Inman is in fact one of the leaders of the congressman's campaign in this area. So he has, I think, to be fair, he has this year and more recently this past summer been a lot more visible in the district, getting out for all of the traditional things like parades, but also meeting with business leaders and others. And so if there was a problem earlier on, he seems to have recognized it and is making an effort to rectify it. Whether that's enough, we don't know. And again, we don't really know to what extent issues like that are going to matter to voters, or whether it will be more of a national question. Right. If you look at the television ads, I think Medicare is going to be a huge issue up here. Our district, and you include the UP and the Northern Lower Peninsula, is one of the oldest in the country in terms of demographically. There's a lot of retired people up here. As we know, this is a very nice place to retire, and so obviously Medicare is going to be of tremendous interest. That's a big issue in the presidential race. And there are all these competing claims about who really supports it and who really doesn't, and who really wants to cut benefits and who doesn't. how all that shakes out and how who the voters choose to believe, I think is going to play a very important role in this one.
I've practically lost track of time, John, because it's been such a smooth conversation, and I appreciate it. Let's end just briefly on one of the ballot issues. We've got 6 different ballot measures to vote on this time around. I'll let you pick. What's the one that piques your interest the most?
Well, one that I'm looking into and going to be doing some reporting on is Proposal 3, which would basically require that the utilities in Michigan generate at least 25% of their electricity from renewable sources by the year 2025. They're also already required under state law to generate 10% from alternative sources within the next couple of years. And so supporters of alternative energy see this ballot initiative as the next step, and they want to take it to a much higher level. The big question, or one of the big questions that's going to be debated is the best way to do that putting it in the state constitution and bypassing the legislature. The supporters will generally argue that the way the legislature is configured right now, with all the lobbying money coming in from big energy, that it's a waste of time, and that it's a huge issue, a very important issue for a lot of different reasons, and we need to take it to the people and let them decide. And the opponents say, no, you cannot sum up an issue like this with one paragraph on a ballot. It needs to go through the normal legislative process. There's a lot of back and forth about whether this is going to raise electric rates. One side says they're going to go down, the other side says they're going to go drastically up. So it's going to be of huge interest. There's already a lot of TV back and forth about it, TV ads. That'll be a big one.
And the Michigan Chamber, the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance, seem to say, no, let's not make this part of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. I guess lastly, let's just give folks an idea of where they can go, where you go, when you're trying to funnel through all of this stuff, whether it's the ballot proposals, whether it's the national issues on Medicare and who wants to cut what and who doesn't. What do you like to do in terms of your research? Do you have a dozen different sources? Is there one or two that are there one or two that you go to in particular?
Well, anytime I'm covering an issue like that, the different sides will have their own websites they're just loaded with information, background. I also look for third-party experts, people who would have a more neutral stance, who could weigh in one way or another to check some of the facts that you will find on some of these sites, right, and some of the competing claims. So it's really a combination of things. It's talking to people who have an interest one way or another, trying to do research into where their funding is coming from. There are good websites, good organizations to try to keep track of that. It can be quite difficult to come up with it. But what I like about these issue-oriented things is that as a journalist, you try to get the competing stories. If there are what you think are just incorrect claims that are being made, you can point that out. But generally, the idea is to get the two sides out there and let the voters make up their own minds, do their own
right,
research, hopefully, and be good citizens and decide which way they think is best.
Which is a great example, a great reason why the Associated Press, I think, is so highly regarded, that you and your colleagues do a nice job with that, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We're just about out of time. Before we go, I want to just take a brief moment to acknowledge something that's happened to those of us in the journalism community here in Northern Michigan. You may have heard this week about the passing of 9 and 10 News and Fox 32 News anchor Scott Michael Trager, who died unexpectedly on Wednesday this week. And we talked about Scott Michael Trager earlier again before we sat down. We do a lot of pre-show conversation, John, so that's where that comes from for those of you just tuning in. But obviously an impact on the community, and when you've got a television broadcaster who literally is on your TV every day or once a week for 20 years even, you come to recognize that person.
You do indeed. I never had the pleasure of actually meeting him, but I admired his work for many years. Just a real comforting presence and strong presence on the air. He was very knowledgeable, good journalist, and we're very sorry to lose him.
We will we'll put up a little graphic here, a photo from the 9 and 10 News website. They've got a story there on Scott Michael Trager's passing, and when I checked in Wednesday night, they already had 500 comments and still counting from viewers. Probably viewers like you who recognize Scott Michael Trager from his work anchoring the morning news for the past 14 years. Also did Sports Overtime show, helped launch that at 9 and 10 News, and has been with that station since 1990. And having worked at 9 and 10, I did have the chance to meet Scott, get to know him a little bit. Obviously, not as much as I would have liked, but my thoughts and prayers are with his family, his wife and 3 kids, and all of my family, friends, and colleagues through 9 and 10 News. Scott Michael Trager passed away this week, and he will be missed. Thanks for watching the Briefing Room this week, and we will hopefully see you again right here next week.